One of the meta breaker comps that's currently gaining a lot of popularity in China is Exotech. Exotech is an item scaling trait where the more items you have, the more HP and attack speed that you get for your whole team. Think of it like Scrat from previous set in Arcane, where the more items you get, the stronger you get. You also get 3 unique items, which are also random every single game, but they can be powerful if you know how to use them very well. And the current meta, where everyone's just selling their board, trying to play for Econ, Fast 9 to try to play their best cat board, Exotech plays a very solid, fundamental, board-building, item-based game plan to help you win streak and find a lot of good top placements. So in this episode of In Too Deep, we're gonna find out how China plays Exotech to perfection at the top challenger level and hop on board with world finalist and one of my favorite players, Flancy, to see just how it's done. Let's first begin by talking about what exactly makes Exotech really strong and what exactly the Chinese players are doing at the very top level. The first thing to understand is that Exotech naturally plays for win streak. Let's say you have a 2-star Jax and a Jhin, and you take an item augment at the very beginning of the game, you very likely will have 3 items when everyone else has maybe 1 at most. And so you should be able to actually push your win streak tempo and preserve a lot of HP. The second thing is that it's a cheap and effective board, and this is actually an important point because there are no 5 costs that are Exotech. In fact, all of the Exotech units are just 1 to 4 costs. So that actually means that Econ augments aren't as important to succeed. You still might do it, especially because some people want to be open to playing other Rageblade holders like Aphelios, or maybe you want an option to reroll. So you still might do it, but it's not as mandatory as it is in other compositions. The last thing that I love about Exotech is that it's much more of a flexible vertical line, vertical defined as just stacking higher the same trait, so 3, 5, 7 Exotech. This is compared to other traits like Anima Squad, which are not very flexible. You kind of have to just play the same 7, 8 units almost every single game. Exotech can actually play 3 and 5 Exotech variants, and we'll talk about some of them below. Here are some of the consideration weaknesses. The first is that you do have to hit Zeri and Sejuani, and you don't have much wiggle room for that. So if you end up stuck on Zeri 1 or Sejuani 1, or hopefully not both, you will struggle a lot. And you are very dependent on Sejuani 2 in the late stages of the game because she will be holding your tank items. You also have to have good Exotech items, otherwise you're going to struggle to get online. And we're going to talk a little bit about what those items are in just a moment. Just as a quick tip on your team planner, you can always check what the Exotech order is on your team planner. And this is important because at your beginning of the game, before you pick your augment, you might be thinking, what are my Exotech items? I want to see them before I commit to an augment that makes me play it. You can go ahead and check your team planner and look at it. In this game, for example, I had Flux Capacitor, the Lantern, and Cyber Coil, which was a pretty good one to play for. And the last thing, of course, is that some people will just take your units, especially Cypher Cash Out players, because they naturally play into the Exotech line. So just be mindful of that. I think Exotech is best played on item encounters, things that give you extra items to get things started, like component anvils, Scuttle Puddle, or loot subscription. And you can itemize your tanks very, very quickly, and you'll have extra items to go for duo or trio carries. Also, if you start off with good Exotech units, you can also just play a good Exotech opener, and we'll go over the tier list in a moment here. The last preamble bit I want to go over is that it scales with the number of items you have. Each item you equip is 200 HP and 7% attack speed, which is kind of like Cybernetic Bulk, except you can keep stacking it up to 3 times. It's very good, and that's why it's very good trait with a bunch of items. Here's an example leveling progression of how you could play some Exotech. So, for example, you start off with Jax, Neferi, Jhin, and just any Bastion. In this case, we have Poppy. Then you can add in other support traits like Kindred to make Jhin actually deal some damage. And then you can have Shyvana to tag in with a Bastion for the Jax. Then that naturally ties into Nitro, and Nidalee Amp goes well with Neferi. This is actually kind of the core of the Nitro reroll composition as well. You might actually play this in the inverse order if you end up playing Nitro at the beginning, so you can totally mix and match. Then at level 7, you start to go for 5 Exotech, and you incorporate some of the 3 costs, throw in some random Bruiser, and you can take out some of these other cheap units you don't really want. And then level 8, you transition to the 7 Exotech and Kindred. Kindred here is actually an optional unit. You don't actually have to play it. It's just like a cheap unit to play, because ultimately what you want to do with Exotech is play a cheap unit to get you to 9. And Kindred just fills in like a good synergy bot, tying Rapid Fire with the Zeri and then Marksman with the Jhin. But you also can just play a good 4 or 5 cost. So, you know, if you hit Renekton and you hit Renekton 2 and 8, just play that over Kindred. and you're good to go. And then level 9, just play any 5 cost. The example we're using right now is Kabuko because Kabuko is broken, but I believe he is actually getting B patched like as I'm literally making this guide. And so Kabuko might be worse. Just slot in any other 5 cost that makes sense. You could play Garen, you could play Zac, you could play Renekton because he's a bruiser. You could also just tie in Aurora as a Dynamo. So a lot of options. And that actually doubles so for Kindred. You can just replace Kindred with another good 5 cost as well. The Exotech tier list. These are the items that you care about the most. Pulse Stabilizer and Flux Capacitor are the 2 best offensive items for this composition. Doubly so if you get both of them. If you get both of them, you can put both on Zeri, and all you need is a Rage Blade, and you have 3 item Zeri. Very, very powerful. Generally speaking, you always put Rage Blade and Gunblade with whatever's left. So Rage Blade, Gunblade, Stabilizer, Rage Blade, Gunblade, and Flux Capacitor. The Corrupted Chassis is the best defensive item. It goes on Sejuani or Mordekaiser. Apparently, there is an Exodia combo with Garen mod Exotech Kabuko. I've personally never done that with Kabuko. I've put it on Garen himself, and it's been very good. But it's just something I want to shout out for. I think the takeaway is that Garen mod on Exotech can have some really powerful combos. So just pay very close attention to anybody that benefits from shielding. And in this case, Kabuko is a really good shield unit. You might be able to get some crazy combos there. The other items are a lot weaker. Lantern is also okay. It's definitely fine to play on Sejuani, but Coil and Hollow Bow, these are 2 items that aren't particularly very good and struggle to get a lot of value. Hollow Bow in particular is pretty poor offensively. So if Hollow Bow is your first item and then you have like Hollow Bow plus Cyber Coil, I would probably stay away from Exotech this game and play something else. Here's some augment ideas of different things that can really make Exotech very strong. The first is things that just give a lot of items. So Eye for an Eye can give you up to 4 components throughout the course of the game, which is just a lot of extra components. And that translates to direct power for Exotech. And that also goes for buried treasures. Anything that helps you complete items. So I believe Cyberdeck does this on combat start. Up to 3 of your Exotech units with 2 items gain an ideal Exotech item. That's very similar to binary airdrop. It's just similar to that. Trial Run is generically very good for tempo. It's like I'm the carry now, but with Exotech items. And that just helps you fight for that win streak really considerably. One of the most powerful augments in this composition is Trait Tracker, simply because it just gives you so many items, and you can use that to just basically turn all your other Exotechs into just a pile of stats. So it turns like Jax and Mordekaiser and even Nefiri into threats in their own rights. And you might even high roll by hitting things like Exotech emblems or other relevant emblems for your comp. Lucky Gloves actually is nice because it counts as multiple items. And so Lucky Gloves will give you good items, plus you get double of the Exotech synergy. Pumping Up is also really solid because you just get a bunch of scaling attack speed for Zeri, and so that's just like a generic good combat for Silver. And then Item Collector is something that just rewards you for getting a lot of items. I think usually around like 13 to 15 is where Item Collector 1 starts to become pretty solid. So if you sense yourself getting a ton of items, you can take something like Item Collector, which just rewards you for having a ton of items. Item recommendations is pretty straightforward. Zeri wants Rage Blade, Gunblade, and a 3rd item. Ideally, it's the Flux Capacitor or the Pulse Stabilizer. But you can also go like a 2nd Rage Blade. Let's say you don't have any of these offensive items, and you're just going to play Exotech anyways. You can go double Rage Blade plus Gunblade. You can also go double Rage Blade plus one of these items. Sejuani's best item is Protector's Vow. It ends up being really good synergy with her passive and her ability. So just tie that in together and then just put a bunch of defensive stats on her. It doesn't really matter which ones. Extensions and variations. I talked about how you could play 3 or 5 Exotech, so let's quickly mention 2 of those situations. The first is you get to play Nitro with Exotech, and instead of going for 7 Exotech, you can just slot in the Nitro units you've been playing all game, and then you're able to kind of snowball that and push levels very quickly. This is something that you usually stick on if you have like a very good setup around Jhin, and then you end up tagging Zeri on later. You kind of look at the early Nitro core and you just stay on it. And then you can also trio carry Elise as well. This is a variation that's pretty popular because it's just very cheap board. And the nice thing is, it feels like it's less important for you to hit Sejuani too, because you're less dependent on it. You have like the robot and perhaps the T-Hex help adding a different source of frontline, so it doesn't feel like everything is onto the Sejuani. Obviously, you'll play something like Nefiri and Nidalee early on before you hit Mord and Elise, so just be a little bit flexible, and sometimes you even just play 4 Nitro with 5 Exotech at the late stage of the game. And of course, you had the flexibility of going for Gen 3 as well, as you kind of continue to level up and roll. Variation number 2 is playing around Cypher. This is pretty common to do if you have a Cypher cash out and you have a really good offensive item as your 3 Exotech. So if you have Exotech with a Flux Capacitor or Pulse, you end up playing Draven and Zeri as a duo. But if you don't have a good offensive item for Exotech on Zeri, then what that usually means is you just play for Zed and Draven duo, and you just kind of ignore the Zeri. If you do have an emblem, consider playing on strong 5 cost. We talked about Garen and Kabuko synergy. Just basically put it on any 5 cost and take out Neferi. Neferi would be the free slot that you have. And then finally, one variation that I think is really underrated is playing around 5 Exotech and Dynamo, and this allows you to play duo carry. You might notice that these are almost the exact same items that you might be playing for Aphelios and Xayah, where Aphelios has like the Rage Blade and the Gun Blade, and then Xayah has like the Infinity Edge and the Crypt. But guess what? You actually have another duo setup that you can play around MF, Zeri, and Aurora, and you can even play the Syndicate as your front line. The downside of this is that your front line is extremely dependent on Sejuani 2, and it still might not be enough. You have to really make sure you have a good Aurora summon, and Aurora should probably summon a good 5-cost frontline unit. We're going to hop on board with one of my favorite Chinese players to watch. His name is Flancy. He is the runner-up of the Set 8 World Championships, has been a long-time strong competitor, always pushing rank 1 on ladder. I believe he's currently rank 2 on ladder at the moment, and is crushing it as per usual. The portal that they're playing on is the component anvils. So this is a extra component start, which is really useful because that way you can kind of finish off things like that Rage Blade or whatever else you need for the Exotech. He sells his Echo pair, and lo and behold, he discovers a Jax and Jhin. So he already has a good Exotech start and just does some light scouting around to see what else people are playing. But for the most part, he is now starting to heavily consider the Exotech. This is a little bit of a stupid min-max, but you're not actually supposed to pick up this orb because you might notice that there are people at 110. This is the health orb. You get permanent health for picking up this orb. And if you don't pick it up, you improve your spot on the carousel, even though you might not even lose a single fight. It's possible for you to be at 100 HP and be second pick. So yeah, it's pretty silly. People are min-maxing this, but I just wanted to call that out because you might be confused why he's not going to pick up this orb for as long as he can. All right, taking a look at his augments here. Table Scraps, Silver Spoon, and Support Mining. Table Scraps is an augment that says that for the next 2 carousels, when there's a champion left over with an item, you get it. And so this is actually kind of exactly something that Exotech could theoretically want because it just gives you 2 extra components. So it's nice, something to think about. Silver Spoon is just giving you 10 EXP immediately, and that's it. That one is okay, but as we talked about, you don't really need econ augments like this in general for playing Exotech, so I don't really like it as much. Support Mining is really solid. It is a full item in 8 turns, which actually kind of lines up exactly what Table Scraps is, and support items can be very powerful in Exotech. Especially ones that have really good synergy by putting it like onto your front line, like Locket, for example, because we know that Exotech can sometimes struggle if you're stuck on a Sejuani 1. So I really like Support Mining out of these 3 options. He rolls options 1 and 2. Option 1 is Caretaker's Ally, which is that every time you level, you get a random 2 cost, and you'll get it every single time you level for the rest of the game. It's something that if you don't have direction, you can take it. But if you take Caretaker's Ally, there's so many 2 costs that don't want to be in Exotech, so you probably should avoid it. I would take Caretaker's Ally if I didn't have any direction whatsoever. Branching out just gives you a random emblem. You're basically gambling, go fishing. Again, we already have direction, so we don't need it. Let's go ahead and take Support Mining. All right, Support Mining it is, and we're going to pop and take a look at our first items here. So right now he has a free bow, tier, and a belt. The first item he should really be thinking about is Rage Blade. Usually you go for Rage Blade onto the Jhin, and Jhin ends up being an item holder for Zeri. Rage Blade on Jhin is good in the early mid game. It's bad in the late game because fights are too fast for Rage Blade to stack quickly. So it's something that he can capitalize on right now and use all of his free item removers later on to move that item to Zeri. Okay, something awkward just happened. We need to rewind to show you, but he actually picked up the health when he was teleporting across the battlefield. So that was an accident. He didn't mean to do that, and I think they need to patch this as soon as they can. It's just like such a stupid min-max, but it is what it is. So definitely a lot of people are like laughing at him because they obviously are just like, haha, you meant to not pick up the orb, but now you're going to be getting 110 HP. He's not opening his second component anvil, and I think he's waiting to see if he can save for the carousel. One trick you can actually do is open that anvil right before the carousel starts, and then make your item pick as you are seeing the carousel develop. It's actually a neat little trick because it'll pull up the armory as it happens. All right, we're going to go ahead and pop the component anvil here, and he can choose two things. One, he can make a defensive item for Jax, or two, he could pick up an offensive item later on for Zeri. He ends up going for a glove, which I think is really interesting. I think a lot of people would make something defensive like a Warmogs. I think Even Shroud is not that strong of a make because Jhin has early Sundering, and so it's not as important in the early game to make things like Last Whisper and Even Shroud if you have a Jhin. It's not that Last Whisper and Even Shroud is useless. It's that Jhin sunders for 20%, Last Whisper and Even Shroud sunders for 30%. So you're getting like a 10% boost, but you're playing a 1-star Jhin. So it's not exactly like you're getting huge value early game compared to some of the other units and pass sets. All right, Flancy ends up losing. He ends up not slamming things like Redemption, and he just kept the sword open. Looks like he wants to probably go for Infinity Edge. But he's spreading out his components and just getting some Exotech value and strength, so he's not necessarily committing to anything. Takes a cloak off of Carousel onto the Fury. Small little detail that I didn't talk about yet, but he's positioning his support mining dummy in the very front by itself, solo frontlining it, so that way he can guarantee that the dummy dies. In the current meta right now, it's actually very common for a lot of people to lose streak and play very, very weak boards, maybe play like 2 Cypher units and lose streak, and not even have 3 Cypher going. So in case that happens, he solo frontlines the dummy just to make sure that it dies. Okay, so he does end up spamming Even Shroud, and this is something that he'll need later on. So I think it's fine to make it. It's not high value. I do think it's a little interesting he didn't choose to make it almost immediately and try to preserve his win streak, but it's okay. I think that's fine because ultimately I think that glove has a lot of use. So you have the option of taking 6 gold or splitting 25. You choose to split 25 4 ways, that extra gold goes wherever, but if you split it 5 ways, you get 5 gold each. It's just one of those things where I think this is really up to the player. I think you should generally default to taking instead of splitting as a safety measure, but it's always fun to gamble, so I'm curious what he does. Splitting is potentially really powerful if you have an econ augment and it punishes other people for splitting as well. 6 people chose to split, so we only got a little bit of gold. I believe he got 4 gold, so that is worse. Oh well, it is what it is. But the nice thing is, I guess a lot of other people are in the same boat, and only 2 people end up getting a little bit extra gold. All right, so we have a Shyvana 2 now in our shop, and we're going to definitely be looking to make the Shyvana 2. And I think we're going to try to transition into Nitro in the mid game as well. Nitro is just really good to just get that robot to help give us extra stats. And again, like offset our front line, because our front line can be very vulnerable, especially if we don't have a Sejuani or Mordekaiser early. Our items are Tier, Cloak, and Rod, which is a little bit awkward. We're probably going to have to slam something like an Adaptive Helm just to get extra stats. And you notice that he also slammed these components for extra HP because that extra HP might end up being the difference maker between winning and fighting. If you ever saw like 100 HP or less wins, it's because of these extra components. So it's just good to stack it. And Neferi and Jax are units that you can either remove or entirely sell, depending on what version of Exotech you're playing. All right, let's take a look at these augments real quick. Eye for an Eye is a augment that says for every 16 champions that die, you get a component up to 3, I believe. And so it kind of feeds into the Exotech game plan, which is pretty nice. Corrosion is for every few seconds, reduce the armor magic resistance of your opponents in the front 2 rows. It's a solid augment, actually. The stats always have said that it was really good, even before augment stats were removed. So I can't imagine anything's changed, just like the same augment. And then Health as Wealth is generic. It's like a little bit of combat, a little bit of econ, which is kind of nice, but it's delayed. So I think I'm favoring Eye for an Eye because I just like more item augments, but we'll see what he picks. He rolls options 2 and 3, and it's Titanic Titan, which is only really useful if you really need the extra HP for like a Cypher cash out or like a Fast 9. That's not our strategy. Lunch Money as our third option is also not really important because, well, 1, I don't think we're like really likely to go into win streak. You usually take Lunch Money if you are 1, desperate for econ, and 2, very strong right now and might even roll soon. And I don't think that's really likely to happen. So I think it's Eye for an Eye. All right, nice. Looks like we took Eye for an Eye, and we have a Kindred 2, which is really nice. We also get to make a Thieves Gloves for the Shyvana, which is really nice, actually. So that way it can get a fully itemized Shyvana 2. We don't make the Kindred 2. Wow, that's actually very surprising to me. I feel like I would automatically make that Kindred 2, but I guess Flancy thinks that he'd rather favor the econ and says that that's fake. I mean, we showed variations where the moment you find an Elise, you just replace this Kindred anyways, because you don't really care that much about keeping Kindred on the board. I mean, activating Marksman is nice for Jim, but for him, it's not worth the econ. And this also tells me that he doesn't want to play into the Nitro variation either. Because if he was going to try to play on Nitro, he would care about the amount of stacks that you can get onto the robot. So this is full transparency. He is not going to be staying on Nitro, just playing it as a temporary intermediate means to get to 7 Exotech. I think if it was reversed around, like he started off with Kindred 2 and Nidalee 2 and Shyvana, and he'd been stacking it at the beginning of the game, that's something you can think about keeping Nitro around and using that as a vehicle to get to level 9 to transition out. But I do think that ultimately he hasn't had that. So starting his Nitro this late into the game means that keeping it around is just going to be a liability later on. That being said, we're still like win-losing, but we're still making econ, which is important. Okay, Flancy picked up a belt off of the carousel, and his support mining item is unstable treasure chest, which is not great, but you know what? This actually might be one of the few compositions that can use it because Exotech wants items, and so unstable treasure chest gives you more items. The problem with it is that it only can give you items on your champions that have free slots, and you might be giving items to units that don't matter, such as like this Kindred, for example. But hey, unstable treasure chest has some synergy with Exotech. Stacks more of those units with items, so not too bad, I suppose. I think you would much prefer stronger combat, though. So if he gets a Reforger later on, I have no doubt he's going to reforge this unstable treasure chest. Because late stages in the game, this item just falls off. It's just too slow, and you have to sacrifice a unit. And so that either compromised your position or might come too late. Let's say you position like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all across in a horizontal line. That means that this unstable treasure chest might die after other units that would receive the items would die as well. But then if you position as it like the Nidalee to be in the solo front line, you lose like Sejuani to be able to get into the right spot to cast in the ideal position. So that kind of risk and reward is not really worth it for the treasure chest, and why it tends to be a weaker item in the late game. Flancy is actually checking the stats and looking to see where unstable treasure chest is for 7 Exotech. It's better than Zeke's, which is actually interesting to me. I thought Zeke's would be quite solid for the composition, so I'm surprised. But it's obviously not as good as Locket and Gem and some of the other really powerhouse ones. So it's, you know, if it's middle of the pack, maybe he'll still consider reforging it. And he gets dropped the Reforger, so I wonder what he's going to do. Taking a look at his itemization, he has the option of making a Gunblade, which is something that I'm thinking about. And he can also make a Protector's Vow onto the Jax. And that way he has his Sejuani items done and his Zeri items done. That leaves us with a Rod, a Belt, a Bow, and another Belt. He doesn't have any anti-heals, so he can consider making a Morello Nomicon. And I think that'll also handle all of his utility. We have Even Shroud for the Sunder, and we have anti-heal. In general, as always, make sure you have anti-heal and a form of resistance reduction of whatever type of damage you do. So you'll have both those bases covered. So overall, these items are pretty good. That does float a bow and another belt, so I am curious what he chooses to do. He might actually try and make a efficiency play of spreading out all of his components. He also might reforge. So let's find out what exactly he does here. Oh, interesting. He makes a second Rage Blade instead of a Gunblade, and he floats the sword, and then he commits to the vow. So he actually did very close to what we expected, but instead of going for a Gunblade, he goes for a second Rage Blade on Zeri. And that is another option that you can do. What this allows you to do is it allows you to cut a rapid fire in the late stage of the game. So that way you don't have to play things like Kindred or even Draven because you have so much attack speed already. Taking a look at the 4-2 augments, when you're presented with 2 augments versus 1, in general, you need to have the 1 augment be a lot of value to justify taking over 2 augments. This is because augments multiply off each other in effectiveness if you combine them. So if you have 2 combat augments at silver, that is oftentimes a way for you to multiply to be better than 1. Put another way, a lot of times these augments at gold versus silver or prismatic versus gold is not twice as strong. So having 2 of those augments should be more value. Piercing Lotus is lower value than usual because we have an Even Shroud. It is nice if we wanted to play some magic damage, so that way we can get some shred as well as on top of our Sunder, but not really necessary here. So I'm in favor of rolling this. In general, I am favoring taking 2 silvers, but they need to be pretty good silvers. This first silver is called 125, which gives you a 1 cost, a 2 cost, and a 5 cost. That is a little bit unnecessary because we don't really need that. We need 4 costs, and the only reason to take this is for the econ and for fishing for a 5 cost. If you're playing like, you know, a powerful vertical that's dependent on hitting something like a Renekton or Aurora, maybe you go for it. But in general, I'll probably stay away from this. This is Climb the Ladder 1, which says any units sharing traits will give extra stats to the survivors. So this is really good in verticals, really good in like, you know, Anima Squad, for example, but not really good in flex compositions like Misfortune. This is actually not bad in Exotech, but it's like one of those things where if you're going to be taking this just for 1 silver, but an augment you don't care about, then it might not be worth just compared to just taking a gold augment. And then gold augment on top of that gives you 9 gold, and this gives you 8 gold. So if you're comparing it, let's just say that theoretically Piercing Lotus and Climb the Ladder was about equal. This also gives you 9 gold, and it gives you potentially higher upside. So sometimes this is how you evaluate it. He rolls the left option and sees Mana Flow. Mana Flow, unfortunately, is not really an augment for Zeri. It's really good for these caster-based comps. And our backline is right now Jhin and Kindred and Elise. It's not particularly super powerful, so I think that's unfortunately a skip as well. Inspiring Epitaph is actually quite solid. This is actually kind of one of the baseline good combat augments in the late stage of the game, and it scales with high HP, which is what Exotech actually benefits from. Exotech has a lot of extra HP due to the item components. Also, it has a benefit of working with the robot as well, because the robot counts as an extra ally, so if it dies, it gives some synergy with a shield with high HP units nearby, so it's good in the immediate, good in the future as well. So I kind of like a lot of it. This is a really good baseline to hold, and we can roll the other options. He rolls into Glass Cannon and Mana Flow. This is an example of having 2 combats that theoretically can scale. In fact, this combo is actually insane in some other compositions, like Techies, for example. Techies wants a lot of mana. Techies wants extra damage amp. Strategists don't really want the damage amp, but they love having things like the Mana Flow and backline damage as well. So a lot of good synergy. This is actually a great example of combat augments that multiply off each other, but it doesn't really work for our composition, sadly. So just keep in mind, this is the kind of stuff you're looking for. And then finally, it's Bulky Buddies and Item Grab Bag. Bulky Buddies is basically worse than Epitaph, and he doesn't actually need that random item at the moment because the items are pretty much done. So I think he's just going to go ahead and pick Epitaph here. And that's how you kind of navigate through a complex series of augment decisions. The more you get reps on it, the more you'll kind of get comfortable doing that. Okay, he's going to go ahead and level and roll, looking for 7 Exotech and the Zeri. Finds a Cho'Gath 2, and I think, oh wow, he makes it. I think he kind of has to play something because we have to remember that his front line is pretty terrible. So, you know, playing around Jax 2 as your primary tank in late stage 4 is not going to be great. Reforges and finds the Zeke's. Actually, we learned that Zeke's apparently in the data is not as good as Unstealable Treasure Chest, ironically enough. So weaker, as chat likes to say in a joking way. Oh, wow, he lost. Maybe he actually did get weaker. Well, he lost against Syndicate Twisted Fate, so there's no shame in that. Also, he was sort of out of position with the Zeke's. He ends up slamming a Giant Slayer, and one thing as a little tip, he reforged not just the support item, but he reforged a component with it. He reforged, I believe, the belt. The belt turned into a bow. He made a Giant Slayer, and so he made another offensive item, which is really good. He has 7 Exotech now, but he needs to dip out of, I guess, Kindred and the Shyvana. Cho'Gath 2 is not great at the moment. He's going to get reworked. I think Brian has said that he is too dependent on 6 Bruiser, and I think that's true. But it is still, what, like 2,000 HP and just a giant hunky offensive lineman. Like, yeah, even if your O-line is not the best, there's still just a body to block the blitzers. Okay, I promised I have watched a game of football or so. That analogy may have sucked. But the idea is you just need kind of heavy things to get in the way. And Cho'Gath 2 is definitely better than Shyvana at this point. So I think we have to get rid of that. Okay, he takes a vest to try and make, I believe, a Crown Guard. And now in goes 7 Exotech, gets the Flux Capacitor. All right, so interesting moment to learn here. Flancy actually did something kind of unusual, which is split the Flux Capacitor and the Pulse Stabilizer, because I've seen a lot of people put Rage Blade onto the Zeri with the Flux Capacitor and put the Pulse Stabilizer onto her as well. But apparently, if you look at the data, it's actually a little bit better delta-wise to put the Pulse Stabilizer onto Jhin as opposed to Zeri. Zeri performs it at 3.9 negative 0.28. And Jin is a 3.8, negative 4. So it's very slight. It's only a tenth of a difference in your average placement. But at the pro level, this is exactly what they care about. They care about those minute differences. And that's pretty interesting. Also worth noting that double Rage Blade Flux Capacitor in Gunblade is basically the same. He had the choice of either. I choose Gunblade because I guess I am a wuss and I think my frontline sucks. But Zeri double Rage Blade Flux Capacitor is basically the same. It's good to know, and I feel like I learned something also just diving into the data behind this. All right, very convincing win, and now we are one fight away from being able to seriously take a look at level 9. And one thing that's kind of interesting is that he is doing this all without 2-star Zeri and without 2-star Sejuani. And he's just doing it. I mean, he has like so many items. He has a ton of HP on his front line. I look at all these health bars onto Mordekaiser and just having Cho'Gath to help out as well. And you'd be surprised how much damage Jin 2 and Zeri 1 can really push out if you just stall for long enough for them. I think this is where the double Rage Blade actually kicks in. Double Rage Blade probably is better for Zeri 1 because Zeri 1 can push out so much damage. I mean, 5.3k is a lot. Jin with the 4.7. Both of them combined are dealing 10k damage. That's plenty. So I think because he's so healthy now, I think he's going to seriously consider looking at level 9. All right, he actually is going to roll a little bit here, and he hits Zeri 2. Okay, now, if he wasn't seriously considering going to 9, he absolutely should now because, well, I mean, he only can roll for Sejuani on 8, and he doesn't have a Sejuani pair. He also makes a Thief's Gloves, and then spreads his components out for Exotech value. Instead of trying to, reforge and make a third item for Sejuani, he actually just spreads things out to get that extra item buff onto his units. Really interesting. I know so many players that would try to reforge something for a third item for the Sejuani, but he's going to save that reforger instead. Now it's just straight to 9 for Flancy. He is actually going to go 9 right now to play the Kindred. That's interesting. I think he could have considered waiting. He's very, very healthy, but he might have scouted it and saw that HP preservation is really important. A lot of times when you're in this spot, one of the most important things to consider is what are the lose streaker or the players at the bottom trying to do? If they're playing the Cypher cash out, if they're playing for the strategist amp comp, which is dominating everything, then you have to understand playing for second or playing for the best possible placement that isn't first place includes preserving your HP. So leveling for Kindred does make his board better. It just neuters his ability to roll for a 2-star 5 cost in the near future. And so that might be worth weighing the risk and reward. But by pressing really hard, he's dealing more damage. And now I think based on the virtue of his HP, he's guaranteed at least a third. Going up against the Blighting Jewel anti-strategist. This is one of the boards that are very low HP, but has the 2-star strategist stuff. So again, that's one of the considerations of why you might level to be aggressive. He's probably gonna look for a real item here for Sejuani. So I'm looking at Crown Guard here probably. Or, ooh, he's got nothing left here. Okay, Crown Guard is. Finds a Renekton. I personally like playing Renekton when you can cut things like the Cho'Gath and the Kindred spots, and you can play Renekton plus another Bastion, but it can get a little bit awkward. Oh, wow, he's actually just really not even going to bother with a third item on Sejuani. I think that's really fascinating. He'd just rather go for a full item on Cho 2 here. I guess at this point, he's just going to hold on to his components and see if something else can come from them. I don't think he has any more eye for an eye components, though. He was greeting earlier because of his augment, waiting for more champions to die. Going up against this Anima Squad board, and this Anima Squad board is struggling to deal with his front line, Xayah and Aurora. There's just too much HP. Too many items, too much HP. And there's a very, very comfortable top 4. Everyone died, 63 HP. He's also racking up enough gold to even consider going to level 10 because people haven't been pressuring him. If he wins his next fight, I think he should seriously take a look at level 10. And level 10 now all of a sudden puts a win on the table. I also noticed that the other player in first place is Twisted Fate, and Twisted Fate tends to fall off really hard late game because he can't really get that much stronger. He already has Misfortune 2 and 3-star everything. 3-star Darius, 3-star Braum, 3-star Skarner. And it's you can't really get much stronger than this. The only way he can get stronger is if he goes to 9 and adds a 2-star 5 cost like Aurora, but that person's stuck on level 8. And so if you can find a way to get to 10, that might be enough. All right, creep round, gives another Thief's Gloves if he wants to. He can also go for an Aurora item if he'd like. I really like playing Aurora in these late game scenarios. She just extends your board. She gives you the option of playing like a 10th unit, or if he goes to level 10, an 11th unit, and that just raises the ceiling of your composition, the cap. He makes a red buff on her as well. Remember, he was floating those 2 bows. He had bow and Neferi, bow on the bench, and he gets to put the Thief's Gloves onto Neferi, making Neferi also a little bit of a chunky threat as well. Yeah, you can really see Exotech, everything clicking together, just overwhelming stats. And now, I'm pretty sure he should go to 10. And I think he closes the game out just by going to 10. Okay, just try to position the Sejuani. One thing about Sejuani is you just want her to be same side as the enemy carrier so that when she casts, she freezes. Don't just auto-default, leave her in the center. Her job at this point is just to be a CC bot and just let everyone else, just by virtue of having too much HP, do the rest of the work. Flancy going up against the Real this time. He did not get the Sejuani positioning. That's okay. Let's see actually how well he does if his Sejuani is out of position. And it looks like it's the difference maker. Okay, so once he gets to 10, he's still going to have to position correctly, but if he can get to 10 and land the Sejuani spot, he should win the game. He ends up getting a tier on the Sejuani, and now he can push to level 10. Level 10 is anything he wants. I like keeping Zach as a pull for the Aurora. Aurora, I see. So he ends up putting the Zach onto the board, roll with the Zach in the board, so that way he can get access to the blobs, then take the Zach out and put it on the bench so that when Aurora pulls in the Zach, he gets the value of the blobs and he's higher HP than usual. And that's a way that you can extend your board. We talk about Aurora being a way to cap your board really high. He basically has Zach on the board as long as he rolls with the blobs in. So it's a really nice heads-up play to improve the strength of his board through Aurora extension. And then this Urgot is just like a nice little way to activate Cho'Gath, since at this point he's too poor to actually replace Cho'Gath. I think in the ideal scenario, the Cho'Gath ends up being Kabuko too, and then he could like find a different unit to play around. But he's just trying to play whatever he can right now, and I think Cho'Gath is just... You could sell Cho'Gath and find a Kabuko 1, but is that really better? Maybe. But this is just a better guarantee fix, and that's why he's probably playing the Urgot, because it just complements his board the best. And this is looking extremely dominant from here on out. I think you can kind of see where the writing is. Easy first place for Fancy. And whoa, he's almost at Challenger already. 488 LP. That's pretty good. So there you go. Hopefully that shows you why Exotech is climbing a lot in popularity on the Chinese server. If you learned a thing or two, drop a comment in the comments below and make sure to share some of your knowledge, because there's a lot of small tidbits about things like Exotech that I think people miss, and I may have missed a lot of things while trying to zoom through the gameplay. But hopefully this helps you find a way to fight against some of those crazy high cap boards by playing some win streak tempo and not feeling like you have to open for it every single time for those high cap boards. All right, enough yapping. Go out there and have some fun, and I'll see you guys in the next video.